very excited to have this group who's going to be talking about Canadian clean technology opportunities. People from across the country doing very innovative things in terms of clean tech, using their operations, their supply chains, really taking a look and finding ways to become real leaders in innovation in the energy sector. So Velma is going to be the moderator. Velma McColl, the principal of Earnscliffe Strategy Group, will be the moderator. So over to you, Velma.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to hear the decibel level of the conversation in a room like this. So great to put everybody together. There's also a bunch of people who are watching us on the webcast, and I just want to say to everybody who's here, there are 2 hashtags for this event. Hashtag CEIS for Canadian Energy Innovation Summit, but the other one I think that's important to start to spark and include this kind of conversation in the broader national conversation is hashtag CDN Energy. Hashtag CDN Energy. So if, for those of you who are tweeting out there or who are watching and who track this over time, if you might add your comment, add your voice into that conversation, because there's a bunch of folks who are watching us outside of this room as well. We're the evolutionary step in the discussion in that this panel is going to talk about opportunities. So you heard some of the things, and so much of the good idea of Premier Wynne of putting this panel together is that we know too little about what's going on in the rest of the country in energy innovation and in clean technology innovation. And so we heard this morning some of what those dynamics are. We're about to push into some interesting and different areas on this panel and hear a little bit more about what's happening in other places in the country, but also sort of themes or models that can be that could maybe be adopted or explored as we amplify this in our national conversation. I'm going to introduce Chris Henderson, who's the founder of Lumos Energy. Chris has written a book called Aboriginal Power. Many of you, if you haven't seen him, he'll be happy to pass a copy along to you. Chris has got to leave us early, so he's going to kick off the panel in just a moment. Robert Watson is the CEO of SaskPower, and he's going to share his experience there and explain for us how it's relevant in the rest of the country. Elyse and Allan is the CEO of GE Canada, and will have a chance to explain to us some of the many, many innovations that GE is involved in across the country, and of course, Mars' own. Murray McCaig is going to talk about, well, I guess amplify what Tom started on this morning, and he's also a partner in the Cleantech Fund, so I think there'll be some interesting stories there. So Chris, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you, Velma, and good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, the way I see it, energy innovation is a fusion between ingenuity, foresight, capital, markets, and opportunity. Energy innovation is a glass half full to driving a sustainable energy future for our country. And finally, energy innovation in a national context is about the primacy of place where resource and opportunity lies, product and price, and the power of people. In my brief remarks, I'm going to talk to the latter, the power of people. Premier Wynne started her remarks in the morning talking about the social dimension of energy, and quite kindly referred to the place of Aboriginal peoples in recognizing the land of the Mississaugas, the new credit that we are on. And as some of you know, and as Velma mentioned, I work as clean energy advisor to dozens of Aboriginal communities, Métis, First Nation, and Inuit across this country. And what's remarkable about energy momentum, first of all, and I think the Council of the Federation represented here and the leaders of the Council really have to be commended for opening up a new Canadian ethos in terms of the relationship of our energy resources with First Peoples in the country. And I just cite a few examples before I turn to where I think prime opportunities lie. If you just look at the provinces whose leaders are represented here, In Saskatchewan, and Robert may talk about this, but the work they've done with the Black Lake Denisoline First Nation to tap into the resources of Elizabeth Falls, a project about to move ahead. Premier Selinger in Manitoba and the work with Wisswattam and Kiosk and other large projects which involve partnerships with First Nations like the Nelson House Creek Nation, which is charting a future for their communities. In Ontario, the leadership of Ontario on the Aboriginal Adder, on the Aboriginal Loan Guarantee Program is profound. And in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and Derek Daly and the Premier and the Minister from Nova Scotia, they have new programs there with First Nations. What does that mean? And why is it relevant to an energy innovation strategy? Well, it's relevant for several reasons. But the good news is, and I think we have to take good news where it is, because I always find the past helps us inform the future. We now have turning turbines today of various kinds, or solar panels, wind, biomass, others, around 80 to 100 major projects from 30, 40, 50 million to several billion, where Aboriginal communities are part of that future. What that does is several things. One, it opens up First Nations to be economic partners in the future economic life of the country, which they have not been for hundreds of years. Secondly, it also helps tap into resources that are out there that need First Nations to be a part and maintain Inuit communities a part of that future. So I think the momentum we've created now needs to be built on, and I will therefore highlight 3 opportunities that I think are germane to the issue of energy innovation and First Peoples. The first is a question of capacity. It's a question I get often. They say, Chris, as you as advisor, do First Nations maintain Inuit communities have the capacity to be innovators? And the short answer is yes, but they have to help them get there. So I am announcing today, and you can check it out on your smartphones, if you go to 2020, which is numerical, catalystprogram.com, starting this fall will be the first what I call an Aboriginal Energy Clean MBA. It's not a full MBA, it's a 3-month intensive education program for 20 Aboriginal leaders at a time who can help take their communities forward to be partners with technology firms, engineering firms, developers, utilities that are here. We need Aboriginal people in leadership positions, and that's part of the innovation process. The second opportunity I would point to is in the bioenergy field, particularly with forest product and agricultural product wastes. I believe that we have been suboptimal across the country with both utility boards and energy authorities and utilities, Crown or private. In looking at this sector, we're looking at them at conventional projects. Bioenergy is in a technological transformation. We can't simply treat it like the same standing offer mechanism as you do with hydro or you do with wind, which are more mature technologies. The bioenergy area needs a different and a more interactive approach to see how the resources that are often accessed by Aboriginal peoples can come into play both for power, heat, combined heat power, and for urban and for rural areas. And part of that involves transportation and shipping. So I do believe that the Council of the Federation has an opportunity in the bio area to look at the vast boreal forest reserves we have and the agricultural reserves we have to see how those wastes from those reserves can be used more intelligently for our energy resources. I don't think we have truly tapped into the power of trees, of feedstock and other that we have in Canada. The third opportunity I would point to, and I was talking to Derek Daly from Newfoundland earlier, was where I was earlier this week, and that was on the north coast of Labrador, in Nain and Rigolet. Remote communities among 300 across the country, most of which who are Aboriginal. We have them in Ontario, in northern Manitoba, in northern Quebec, in northern Saskatchewan, Alberta, BC, NWT, and the territories, of course, in Yukon and Nunavut. So how do we change the reality in those communities? I do think it's time to look at the fundamental innovation mechanism that catalyzed innovation on the grid for renewable energy, which is a simple power purchase agreement. You have the ability to locate a set price or a negotiated price, and that puts the power of risk to the innovator, to the technology firm, and their partners in Aboriginal communities to do renewable energy projects. Well, it's time for a northern and remote power purchase agreement, where the different forms of subsidy from the rate base or support or ratepayers themselves in the north or from the federal government with the Aboriginal relationships to put that in one economic pie and say, here's the baseline of business as usual today. If that's the cost today, and you can locate that in a contractual mechanism, then you let private sector and innovation take its risk to say, with their Aboriginal partners, can they do better in a life cycle context? So those are the 3 opportunities I would put on the table, Velma, that I think brings Aboriginal people to play even more profoundly, building on the momentum we built. 1 is to look at how Aboriginal capacity is built. 2 is to truly leverage our bioresources. I don't think our strategies there are profound enough It needs to be more collaborative. It's not strictly contractual. And finally, for northern and remote communities, I do think the challenge there is very much creating a new fiscal contracting mechanism that allows risk to occur. I'll close my remarks. I will leave a little bit earlier for a family reason that came up urgently in Ottawa. But at any time, if you have any questions about Aboriginal communities and their place in the Canadian map and landscape of energy, please do contact me. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm going to take the liberty, because Chris does have to leave us early, of just asking a follow-up question, because you know one of the challenges in the Canadian energy strategy and in the Council of the Federation process is that the premiers, because it's provinces and territories only, the premiers don't meet formally and haven't formally included First Nations issues in the Canadian energy strategy because the federal government's not at that table. So it's interesting because your 3 suggestions would give a way to place some emphasis on that in the energy strategy, and then maybe sometime down the road there'll be that larger conversation with the federal government and the provinces with First Nations on resource revenue sharing.
I think you're right on, Velma. I would say this, that, I mean, as you know, the chiefs across the country for First Nations meet about every 3 or 4 months. In the December plenary in Ottawa, they had a plenary on energy that I was at and speaking at. It was due to go for an hour and a half. It went for 4.5 hours. It changed the whole schedule. There is concern, there is opportunity, there's desire on the part of First Nations and Métis and Inuit communities to be partners. And I do think you will see things come from the Assembly and Chief Adlio and others to outreach that I think could interact with premiers and leaders as well as the private sector. The opportunity's there. We've made great momentum. I'll say this right now, and I have the numbers to prove it. There is no single economic driver for Aboriginal prosperity in this country than First Nations participation with energy. It makes participation with due respect in mining or forestry small change, and I have the numbers to prove it. The question now is to make that work, and I think it can be a remarkable Canadian story.
And by participation in Canadian energy, you don't just mean participation in projects, you mean electrification of communities, and so make sure that everybody understands the broadest context of that.
It's renewable energy generation, it's the right kind of deals in the fossil sector, and it's transmission. And it's also, in fact, even working in the electricity sector, which I know electricity sector companies are very open to. This will require further conversations. We should go into deep with them, one on one or off, whatever the case may be. Look at opportunities like Globe 2014 happening in a month in Vancouver, connecting to take this further. These are commercial opportunities that have really profound and deep social and environmental benefits.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And we understand the dynamics, so we'll let you slip off the stage whenever it's appropriate
Great.
for you.
Thank you.
Elyse, can I turn it over to you?
Sure. First of all, Chris, I agree with everything that you've just talked about, and I think in terms of the opportunity, it's just waiting for all of us to sort of figure out how to move forward with it, and I think we have to test some things, right? We just have to get going. Let me just comment on that on a couple of things, Velma, to get the discussion started. Just in terms of clean tech technology and the role of technology, maybe my starting gamut is that we're so bullish that technology can solve so many of the challenges that are out there, and that we don't have to make a choice between developing energy and energy resources and the environment. The fact of the matter is we can do both because technology enables us to do both. And I think a lot of times we put them against one another as opposed to saying actually the path to the environmental solutions is all around technology. And I think there are lots of examples of that, and we go back to sort of our Thomas Edison days where he said, you know, I see what the world needs and then I invent it. And I think that's where we've worked a lot with, certainly with our customers. But if you take Alberta, where we're trying to certainly look at how do we build efficient power generation that also obviously reduces the emissions that are coming from the oil sands. Over the past, 1996 to 2006, a 50% reduction in emissions in power generation because of the shift to cogeneration and the amount of cogeneration that's come on stream in Alberta. If you look at the work that we've done with the oil producers around SAGD, the steam-assisted gravitational drainage, oil sands production, we're now recycling 98% of the water that's used in that is recycled. These are stories that we don't hear about, but there's also examples of where technology, focused technology, working over, with the producers, has addressed serious environmental challenges, be it emissions, be it water usage. And there's a lot of other examples of where that is happening. Can it be more? Yes. But the point is that a lot of these environmental challenges really have technology solutions. We just announced this week 2 things that I think are relevant to the broader discussion. Years ago, a number of years ago, we announced something called Ecomagination. And Ecomagination was an initiative by the company that said, we firmly believe that, and this was when we saw that there was a big demand for environmental solutions, but yet when, as a supplier, you went to sell them, you create, you come out with a brand new product that's really spiffy. Nobody wants to buy it because it's more expensive. We're trying to recoup, right, the investment we put in. It's solving the environmental challenge, but we're not seeing the customer willing to put in the extra dollar to buy that. And we said, how do we solve that? Is that we have to make sure that the operating performance, not just the environmental performance of the product, whatever it is, we have to make sure that the operating performance is so significantly better than what has been on the market before, that that payback to the customer will offset some incremental premium so that we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have the environmental solution and we can also have better operational performance. That was the concept of Ecomagination. I think it's 8 years ago we announced it. Our $80 billion business has done quite well, thank you. So that if you come up with the environmental technology that has better operating performance, the market responds. So this week, we just announced another $10 billion in R&D and focus on continuing now to continue to invent and kind of relaunch Ecomagination. Now that the financial crisis has sort of passed us a bit, we can get back on track with this, and that's very exciting. Concurrent with that, we also announced globally a focus on distributed power. And this whole idea that, as you look at sort of the new gas economy, the ability now to take gas to new places, to new communities, with new technologies that bring efficiency and the whole range of megawatts is a tremendous global opportunity, and Canada is a wonderful, wonderful place to pilot so much of that. And that was just announced, which was interesting because it's the same time as this great announcement from SDDC. So all that to say that we think technology, there's a real role for technology, and we should be excited about it. The second thing I'll just talk about is how do we innovate? And I think one of the most important comments that came up in the first panel, it's been reinforced in something we call the Innovation Barometer. We interview executives once a year, 22 different countries. The number one thing in Canada that people say drives innovation, it's all around collaboration and the value and the importance of collaboration, especially in the marketplace that we're in today. And we're investing in that in Canada. For example, in Alberta, we built a new customer innovation center. It was the first in the world that was focused on real front-end customer engineering innovation. We've since opened them in China, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and Japan, all modeled after the one that we have here in Canada in Alberta. A second form of, and that one was all around how do we design the innovation process. And somebody, I think Tom commented on, or the fellow from Siemens, Ali, commented on facilitation, right? When you have all these parties together, how do you make sure that it's just not a nice, interesting meeting, but how do you actually drive the conversation forward to innovation? So that is the premise of the Innovation Center that we invested in Alberta. It's not about the walls and the meeting rooms and all the IT. It's actually about the process of innovation itself when you are bringing in multiple parties to collaborate so that it is efficient, timely, and productive. We've done a similar center here with one of our businesses up in Markham, where we have the Global Center for Digital Energy is based here in Ontario in Markham. We invested with the Ontario government over $40 million to build a research and design, manufacturing center. But what's critical there is we have the collaboration center where utility leaders from all over the world come here to work with our designers, work with the R&D team, and then actually pilot, test, build, and innovate. And so that's quite exciting. The comment I would say, and the third thing, I was at the Wisdom Exchange at Ontario Hosts for SMEs, and I had a lot of supply chain there. And the observation I had the other night was how much R&D as a multinational can be done with supply chain. And oftentimes we think forward to the customer, but I was reminded of the amount of investment we make in supply chain, and how many of these suppliers were telling me of the collaboration we're doing with them on their R&D so that they can ultimately serve the end customer better. And I think it tells a great story of the value of multinationals and the linkage, the importance of the linkage of SMEs to multinationals. Final comment on how to innovate from my observations of us trying so hard to always do it here and everywhere else is we have to have a desire to move quickly. We oftentimes will be a little risk averse. And if we have government partners and academic partners, everybody wants the paperwork right. They want to make sure that it's all, we're going to know where we're going to end. And you know what? Innovation doesn't work that way. And if we as a group want to innovate, we have to come up with models of innovation that facilitate speed, are tolerant to failure, and are somewhat patient, that we won't always get where we want, but they're also flexible because we will learn in the process, and if we are comfortable to redirect, we may still end up with something even more brilliant than where we went. So we have to focus on speed, we have to allow for flexibility, and we have to be patient, recognizing that the whole idea of innovation is that you will fail. And for government and sometimes academia, when we're trying to work on collaborative agreements, everyone's worried about that because we don't want to fail. We're set up, and so how do we think that through? Because that's what innovation is about and pilots are about. If every pilot succeeds, then how innovative were we really being? Because if we know the answer, we weren't innovating. And so we just have to think about that. And finally, just to get it going, how do we drive more innovation? I think the role that you're going to hear that government has played and Crown corporations have played in sort of the Weyburn carbon capture projects in Saskatchewan are fabulous. CCEMC, we think, is terrific. What they're doing, the whole model that Alberta has of putting some funds into a technology fund, working with all sorts of forms of collaboration, we think are great because it's not prescriptive, it's very creative. Tax stuff, so yes, the accelerated tax depreciation stuff matters to companies like us, and I think to some of the other companies out there. Expanding that into environmental and new types of clean tech products is important. They've done some of that. And I think there's more opportunity, two areas, just a lot more opportunity to do pilots, and I think we get stuck not getting pilots to market because of the issues I talked about before. Everybody wants it so perfect. We take so long to get the paperwork together that I can do the pilot in 6 other countries before we can sometimes get it done here. And we just have to, I think, together as a nation, think of how to move more quickly on that. And on gas, and when we think about remote communities, there is such a tremendous opportunity to move us off high-cost diesel onto low-cost gas, but we have to think of that virtual pipeline. From the end of the pipe to the remote community, who will bear the cost of the infrastructure? What is the role of government? What is the role of the private sector? Who will finance? How does risk sharing occur? The solution and the technology is there. That is not the issue, but there is an infrastructure investment cost that I think we need to think about, and I think people are very open to participate in it, but the discussion sometimes stops because we're not willing to get into the infrastructure of it. Right. So those are just a couple of thoughts. Thanks.
That's great, Elyse. Roger Gibbons, who many of you would know who was at the Canada West Foundation and who was one of the instigators of calling for a Canadian energy strategy, said, strategy is dialogue, strategy is collaboration, that sometimes we don't need to wait until we write the perfect strategy on a piece of paper, that in having these kinds of conversations and in creating the dialogue, we can do that. And then the other thing that I'm reminded of is that sometimes when you're moving from one system, we recognize that we're in a transition period, and often in various industries, or we're moving in a transition from an old system to a new system. Sometimes what you have to do is prototype. So maybe creating a little bit more space for prototypes would be helpful at this point in our evolution. Robert, could I?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I'm a Hamilton boy, born and raised, and I've been living in Saskatchewan for 9 years now. This is a nice spring day compared to Saskatchewan. I'll have you know it's minus 40 in Regina today. Two things that they look at in Saskatchewan is they're football fans. You can imagine me being a Hamilton fan sitting in that stadium in November. It was not a pleasant task at all. But also curling, so there's another sport. Curling is a really passion in Saskatchewan, so we do it that way. SaskPower, particularly, SaskPower is a Crown corporation. We're fully integrated. We are fully responsible for power, transmission, distribution, and the commercial aspect of power in the province of Saskatchewan. We do have private power production, but we sign long-term contracts for that to be done. There's a couple of things that, just to give you some perspective, the province of Saskatchewan goes from the 49th parallel to the 60th parallel. It is the geographical size of Texas, and we're now 1.1 million people. We have as much transmission lines as the province of Ontario has, with 14 million people. And we have to maintain that. We have an aging infrastructure. Ours is arguably the second oldest infrastructure in the province. We have 1.25 million wooden poles in the province. Average age of those wooden poles is 35 years old. A huge, daunting project for the province to undertake. I want to take a couple of minutes and just go through. Three things come to mind to start off with ours, is that we are an operating utility. In our vision and mission statements, we have the words world's best, and that's what we're striving to be. We also have in our vision mission statement, affordable. And I've not heard the word affordable used too much today. And being an operating power company, you have to keep that in mind no matter what. Last but not least, we have in our vision mission statement, innovation. We have to be innovative. We know we have to be innovative. And there's several aspects that we think we are being innovative today, and I'll just throw them out. First of all, I couldn't agree more with Chris about the social aspect of being innovative. We signed, last year, we signed agreement with the First Nations Power Authority. This is an authority that represents the 74 First Nations in the province to promote new power development in the province through the First Nations. And we've assigned certain megawatts to go through this. So we look for them for wind, for run-of-the-river hydro, any aspect. And in fact, we're using some of them for our smart meter developments and growth. Second thing is, Chris mentioned Tazi Tway. It's a potential 50 megawatt run-of-the-river power facility, a stone's throw away from the 60th parallel up in the north, on a First Nations reserve. Not in the Treasury Land Territory, on the reserve. And we are going to work with the Black Lake community, which is a very, very depressed community. I can tell you, very depressed. The only way you can get in and out of there is to fly. Very depressed community, where they're going to take a 30% equity stake in the power facility and fully run the facility for us. But even to get us to the point of a shovel in the ground is going to cost SaskPower approximately $42 million to do that. Last but not least, we have funded a geothermal trial to be done in the southern part of the province. For geothermal possibilities, and a production geothermal facility, a 5 megawatt geothermal facility in the province. I'll now move to what we want to particularly talk to the world about, and the world's quite interested in, is our fully carbon capture and storage facility. In the southern part of the province, we sit on top of about a 300-year supply of coal. It's surface. You just drag it off the top, put it in a truck, and take it over to our plant. If it spills, you just pick it up and put it back in the truck, and you carry on. So we have a responsibility, quite frankly, to make sure that we use that equity as long as we possibly can. First of all, we're like everybody else in the world, the end of coal is here. We are certainly planning for the end of coal, but we want to use our assets as long as we possibly can. So therefore, we have, and we're just about finished, the capture facility is done. It's fully built and we're commissioning it now. The production facility is still being done. The reason it took us longer is that we had to, turbine designed and built by Hitachi is the first in the world carbon-ready turbine. So it's in place and it's ready to go, and we had to rebuild the boiler. We're using steam from the power facility to run the capture facility. We're going to capture 1 million tons of CO2 a year. 90% of the emissions from that plant we're going to capture. We're going to get it down to about 120 tons per gigawatt hour. Normal plant gives you out 1,100 tons. A brand new gas plant, combined cycle gas plant, is about 500 tons. We're 90%. We already have commercial contracts in place to sell the CO2 to Cenovus. They're going to use the CO2 for enhanced oil recovery that they've been doing in the Weyburn area for 10 years. CO2 hits heavy oil, expands it, drives it up out of the ground. We already have a contract to sell 80% of the fly ash from the facility, and it is a great chemical compound for the manufacturing of cement. And last but not least, we already have a contract to sell. We're turning the SO2 that we capture 100% of the SO2. We have a contract to sell it, sulfuric acid, and we're going to be transporting 2 tanker trucks a day out of there for sulfuric acid we're selling. So it is not just capturing the CO2, it's a commercial operation. Last but not least, we have a deep well, 3.5 kilometers down, where we're going to test permanent storage of CO2. And it's drilled, it's ready to go, and we have it done. So the facility is ready to go. As I mentioned, the capture facility is done and it's ready to go. We are presently building, beside it at our sister plant, a test facility where manufacturers from around the world can come and test their capture technology. We will charge them for it, but they'll test it. And we already have Hitachi signed up for it, and suppliers from around the world wanting to come and test it. Last but not least, we've set up a chair at the University of Regina. The chair is funded by SaskPower and is a chair on carbon technology, specifically for the research of carbon technology, not only the capture of it, the use of it, and the commercialization of it. We've set up a chair, and that's been set up with that already. So we're there. We're there. We're going to get it in place. We do have interest from around the world. We have the Chinese there. We have Indonesia, Thailand, Japan, Germany, Poland, Turkey, United Arab Emirates. We just got a notice yesterday that Yemen wants to come and visit us. They're all looking at how they're going to be able to take that. There's over 3,000 coal-burning plants in the world, and there's more being built. The Chinese right now in the southern part of China are building an 8-gigawatt coal-burning plant. 8,000 megawatts coal-burning plant they're building down there now. I was in South Africa 2 years ago, and they're building 3 5,000-megawatt coal-burning plants. Huge facilities. And I can tell you, they're all seriously looking at how they take the CO2 out of the air and store it and or use it for enhanced oil recovery. We are fully aware that this is a technology and innovation that has a life end to it. But we're using it as a way to make sure that we keep power in the province of Saskatchewan as affordable as we possibly can while we transition through the next century. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I think you're demonstrating Canadian expertise that's exportable around the world, but also very innovative in finding lines, almost full closed loop production, but finding lines of commercial activity within your operation. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Murray?
That's a great story, Bob. I love seeing utilities taking big risks on innovative new projects. And I think we have a few other companies in our portfolio that we're going to introduce you to. It's nice when you can sit on a panel full of customers here.
We did that for you.
Thank you very much. So before I get going and make a few remarks, I just want to say a big congratulations to John Dogterm over here, who's worked tirelessly on getting the Advanced Energy Center set up. We finally got the name right, and John's team, and they've worked very closely with the province here, and I think it's going to be a really key piece in the puzzle of taking innovative ideas through to building large, world-class corporations. So I manage the Mars Cleantech Fund in partnership with Tom Rand, and we are an early stage investor in clean tech, which isn't exactly in trend or fashion as of late. So we're really bucking the trend, but we think now is the time to be investing in clean tech, and we think there's a ton of great opportunities here in Ontario. All of our capital comes from private investors, and we have an amazing set of investors, some of whom are in this room, very brilliant entrepreneurs, and they provide a lot of great advice to us as a fund. We've done to date 8 investments, and that's been in a very short time frame of about 18 months, which makes us probably the most active venture capital investor in the clean tech space. And all 8 of our investments have been here in Ontario, not because we had to invest here in Ontario, but because we wanted to. That's where we found the best technologies and the best opportunities. And we're looking to do a lot more investing here. And as our name suggests, we have a unique partnership with Mars. And if you don't know Mars, myself, I've been through 2 startups, one in the telecom sector, one in the clean tech sector. And I really wish Mars was around when I was launching these companies. I would have avoided a lot of pain and grief and many mistakes. What Mars can do for entrepreneurs is fantastic, and a lot of successful entrepreneurs are here in the room, and I think they could attest to the help they've gotten here at Mars, really enabling them to work through their concept and get it investment ready. They provide mentors, corporate connections, help get access to capital, and many other benefits. But I think what's even more valuable for Mars, or Mars is even more valuable, I'd say, to the investment community and to corporations, because it's kind of a one-stop shop where you can come to see a ton of great ideas that Mars has already filtered through all the crazy ones, and come up with, help these ideas kind of get investment ready. And so as an investor, you've got all these ideas, they're now investment ready. It reduces the amount of due diligence you need to do and kind of filtering through the weeds trying to find good ideas. And I think we need to just continue to expand this, because this is what attracts venture investors. It's what attracts corporations from around the world. They want to come to Canada. They want to come to one stop and be able to see the best of the best. And I think this is where the provinces need to really be coordinating so we can show them the best of Canada. Just talking on energy innovation, and I come at it from a bit of a different perspective. I really, being a proud Canadian, I ask, do we want to be a user of innovation? I think that's great, being a user of foreign innovation. But even more importantly, I want us to be a creator of innovation with global market opportunity. I want to see us building the Bombardiers, the Blackberries of the new energy economy. And I want to see it as a venture capital investor, because I'm going to generate a ton of stellar returns here for our investors. And I want to see us generating wealth, jobs, everything else here in Canada. But definitely as a very small venture fund, we can't do this alone. And it requires a lot of partnerships to take a company from an idea to a successful global corporation. And keeping with our hockey theme here, I was thinking of that commercial I think we all saw during the Olympics with Jonathan Taves, where he's sort of sitting in front, and then we got all these people behind him who helped carpool, get him to where he needed to be. And that's what it takes to have success in innovation too. We've got a lot of great research institutions here in Ontario. We generate a ton of intellectual property. And until we started getting serious about commercializing that innovation with centers like Mars, We usually just license that down to the US or abroad. Now I think we're doing a great job of taking that intellectual property, starting to commercialize it, and getting it investment ready for companies, for investors like ourselves. I know as an investor, we now find ourselves hitting that next wall and that next gap, which is, you know, we've got the rocket, it's on the launch pad, we've got a little bit of fuel in there, but not quite enough. We need more capital, and we need corporate partners, and we need utilities who are willing to take risks, get some pilots going, using the first-class infrastructure we have here in the country. Even if you're not going to be installing it broadly now, I know it allows these companies to get that first pilot and then go abroad and start selling. I spent a lot of time in the water sector as well, and so often it was the case that you had a great technology here in Ontario, but we weren't really set up here for those utilities to take the risks and take on new innovations. So you had to go abroad and sell it, and you had to sell a ton of it before you could come back here and get your first sale on your home turf.
Right.
So I'll just leave it at that and say, I think what we really need to be talking about is how we bring all these partnerships together to kind of create the Jonathan Taves of the Canadian hockey team.
Right, with that ever-expanding picture. The folks with the microphone, if you could just start to get ready, because we'll open it up to the floor from here in just a second. But I'm hearing, it's interesting because, Robert was talking about the fact that you're creating a space in Saskatchewan where others can come and basically test what they're wanting to do. And you're talking about innovation centers. Mars is an innovation center in the Advanced Energy Innovation Center. So, I mean, there's a theme here around all of these centers that we have, and I think it's not broadly understood that we have this kind of expertise in the country. So Premier Wynne has joined us again, and so I wonder if, before we open it up to the floor, if the three of you would have one suggestion to the premiers as they head towards their August, their job is to pull together an energy innovation strategy, and we have officials from other jurisdictions. So and it's not just something that captures what we're doing today. It's meant to be forward-looking. It's meant to look out 5, 10, 15, 20 years to what is Canada's energy future look like. So given your experience and given the opportunities that you're all living with and understanding, what would you suggest for the premiers for the Canadian energy strategy?
Well, being a utility, we've actually developed a 40-year power plan, what sort of power we need out 40 years. Just to give you a perspective, last year our energy consumption grew 6.5% in the province, and that's with potash being a bit slow. It's not slow in the province at all. We can plan out 40 years because it's generally, we know we're a mining economy, oil and stuff like that, large uranium deposits in the world, large potash deposits in the world, et cetera. So, and we're fully aware that, one of the things that we do have an issue with, and it's difficult to dive in, one of the dialogues has to get there is the difference between a base load power and peaking power or adding on power. I mean, it is fundamental to power companies to have base load power, because the people just don't get it if it goes off and it's minus 40 out there, why you maybe tried out something new, right? And I'm not being a bit facetious, but they just, they don't get it. One of the main factors is this getting the grid smart. I've come from the telecommunications industry. I spent my whole career there. I was educated at Ryerson in the power major, but we've got to get these grids smart. They've got to get them intelligent, and not just smart meters sitting at the end. They've got to be as dynamic, as intelligent as a telecommunications network, these grids. And they're pretty dumb right now, the grids. I mean, I'm astounded that people don't know. People don't realize that we don't know when you're out if you don't have a smart meter. We have no idea if a house is out. And my son lives in the city here, and I was in the city here at Christmas time and sitting in the dark. Yeah. But it's like that. So I would think one of the things, because there's different parts across the different province. I mean, Ontario decided to shut down its coal plants. you know, one of the things is because you import coal. Right? One of the major economic factors is to shut down, you import coal. Where we don't. We import it, we have it there. So we have a good reason to keep it going longer. So different areas, a different perspective. Trading power certainly is a major factor. You know, you're getting the jurisdictions together, but the idea of trading power and you know, jurisdictions can get into disputes easily about power, and it doesn't seem like it doesn't seem much, but it gets to be quite complicated if you can't shift power, because we're all part of a North American grid now, and if you don't do it properly, you can get isolated. The grid will isolate you, and you're in big trouble if the grid isolates you.
So do I hear you saying that we should be taking a systems approach, including North American systems approach to the grid?
Yeah, it's not just one jurisdiction by itself. It has to be North American.
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah.
Elyse?
There's a lot of recommendations, but first I'll start with Smart Grid, because certainly I wish I could take you all up to Markham, to our center up there, because they show exactly that so well, how still ignorant, and for lack of a better word, just, you know, we are about, in terms of running the grid right now, when things go down, how much cost there is in terms of labor, trucks, resources to find the outages, to fix it correctly. And with the technology exists today to save tremendous amounts of money in the system that would in fact give you capacity to invest in other areas. Between the communication technology, the wireless communication technology, and everything that's there. And it's really incredibly exciting. I think there is work happening in many of the provinces. I know between my colleague here, you know, at Siemens, our friends, and us, I mean, there's a lot happening in Canada. But we're unique in Canada because in many cases we have crown corporations. We have the ability to actually move quicker if we wanted to, because as you said, you started out, and Gaetano, I think, said, I have all the pieces, right? We have all the pieces in a lot of the crown corporations to test things much faster and do metrics and prototype it much faster. That could then become a base for design that gets marketed around the rest of the world. And I don't think we realize the unique structure we have that actually enables us to be a terrific piloting and prototyping center in the world. And that would be the first comment. The second, I'll just talk. Yeah, well, that I was supporting his.
Sure, okay. Okay. I'll give you a pass on that one.
Was that quick enough? The other quick comment I'd make is the ability to move quickly on pilots. You know, the road to commercialization on innovation is you got to get out there and try it.
Right.
And, you know, you need this, you know, we've done it with Hydro One where there's a community, that's a test community. Obviously, there's a story of it being done in New Brunswick, but across the country, if we were to say, take that remote community, how are we going to build that virtual pipeline to that mine site, you know, up in, you know, northern Quebec or up in Labrador? What is the vehicle? You know, I love what you're doing, and we just need more of that, not only through government, but it is very hard to get it with customers, with producers. Our mining companies, our oil and gas producers, they're commodities companies, so this focus is not always on innovation because they're used to sort of making production when the pricing is strong in the commodity market. The concept of piloting, you know, it's not sort of necessarily a natural act as much as, whereas with the crown corporations, the government energy involvement that we have here, there are things that you could do much faster if you collectively as a federation said, we want to be driving innovation in these areas and which province will do which, and then make a commitment and open it up in an open way for partners to come play. Right. And we don't have enough of that.
Fascinating, fascinating. Murray?
Well, let me first say that I think we're doing an amazing job here in Canada and specifically Ontario in supporting clean tech innovation. You can't think of a better place to come launch a clean tech startup, and we see that. We see, you know, foreign companies coming to get launched here in Ontario. It's great. And I would kind of reinforce, you know, doing more of the same. We have this Innovation Demonstration Fund here in Ontario, which is a fantastic resource for getting pilots going. And I know so many of the companies we've invested in, they wouldn't be up and running unless they hadn't received that support. And also compliment SDTC as well, because they've been instrumental in getting these pilots going. I think some of the roadblocks are actually in getting the large utilities or large companies to take on those pilots. So I think, maybe some regulatory tweaks, and I know John and the Advanced Energy Center are going to be working with, a lot of the regulators to try and, tweak those programs so that there's more incentive to get innovation more rapidly into those systems. And of course, for venture capitalists who are investing in Ontario, they should be well rewarded.
Not just
I'm just saying.
Ontario. Not just Ontario.
Nationally.
Nationally, talk about the country.
Nationally, of course.
Yes, nationally. Questions from the floor, if I could?
I
Yeah.
have,
Someone will bring you the mic in a moment. Oh, there you go.
I have a quick one. It follows up on
Please
Elyse.
identify yourself for the rest of the
Sorry,
room.
Lisa DeMarco with Norton Rose Fulbright. I have a quick question following up on Elise's point around really perfection being the enemy of the good and tolerance for failure and pushing forward with pilots, which is very, very, I concur, extraordinarily important. However, I have some sympathy for a number of the regulated utilities and entities in the room who are really under a microscope from the ratepayer, from the taxpayer. How do we create a safe space for them to, try and fail a little bit?
I would just say, I think that is in fact what I would challenge the group to find out, because I think you'd find that public sector is willing to be there from a supplier standpoint, but you need kind of the person who is the operator, right, to sort of give you, we would call it the slipstream, right, the place where you can test whatever it is you're working on. And my colleagues here may, have other examples. I mean, what I think, Robert, you've been creating is a wonderful example of that.
But you have the support of the government to do that.
Right. How did you get the support of the government?
Yeah, I was, just to give you a bit of history, as I said, I put all my life in communications, and I was CEO of SaskTower, and then the Premier asked me to move over to SaskPower. What occurred to me when I went in there, and this is some self-criticism, is power companies can be fairly territorial. I mean, say it in a nice way, but anyways, because they've been, two things. First of all, no offense, but they're engineers, and those guys are fairly direct, right? They go down a path, and to get them off that path is quite difficult. But also, they've been beat up so much over the, over decisions now. If it's a bad decision, then fine. So one thing I purposely did going into SaskPower is opened it up, transparent, right? You got to come clean and stuff like that. And quite frankly, even major telecommunications carriers have got to come cleaner and transparent with your consumer, because they're smarter, they're more reactive, they're smarter, they're more demanding, and no longer can you treat a power consumer like they have no choice. You've got to treat them like they have a choice.
Right.
You've got to do that way. So that is research. You're going to tell them right up front, you're going to do this research, and you're going to spend so much money doing this, and this is the results you're going to have. And you come out with it. So I think it's transparency is the big issue.
Lisa, I would argue that it's happening. I mean, we've got one of our portfolio companies, HydroStore, which is doing a project here with Toronto Hydro. They've got capital from SDTC, IDF. We've put in some equity capital and a very tiny commitment from Toronto Hydro to get that first 1 megawatt energy storage project pilot up and running.
Yeah, so I mean, I think those kinds of examples are great, but I think giving some thought to how we create a broader dynamic, not just in Ontario with a couple. I mean, we need these examples to flourish across the country.
I think to sustain it.
Yes.
So I mean, I think that the challenge always is that there's no lack of ideas, right? There's so many ideas, but how do we create the frameworks that allow for sustainable innovation so we can replicate and sort of share the best practices and the learnings, and so that sharing, I mean, I wonder how much time is spent sort of sharing the best practices and what vehicles are working from province to province even, so that people can take the New Brunswick example, the Saskatchewan example, and say, okay, how do I replicate that? What have you learned that I don't make that mistake? I make my own mistake, but I go ahead with it. But there, to your point, there are a lot of different things, but they're one-offs, you trace them. I love what STDC has been, because it's been a sustained vehicle for a period of years. There's a method, there's to the madness, it's like it's managed, it's done well, everyone knows the rules. I think what CCMC is doing now. It's sustained. You know it's going to be there for a while. Some of the other concerns as a supplier is you don't want to go into a pilot if you think it's a one-off sort of maybe politically motivated activity that you run the risk that, particularly on big capital stuff, that in 6 months it's going to be gone. And so when you have in place more institution that is managing this innovation, you know that it will be sustained, and as an investor in a capital project, you can say, okay, I've got a partner here that, you know, as political climates change or whatever, you know, this pilot will continue, right? And that's really important.
Yeah, because the other theme I hear through the course of these two panels this morning is that we need more of the innovators, small technology developers to be talking to the large adopters, you know, and so the integrators, we're going to hear from some of those folks this afternoon, but that is a theme, and it would be interesting to think a bit more about how we encourage more universally conversations like that. Yes, a question.
Yeah, Jim Burpee, Canadian Electricity Association. I was going to have a clever hockey analogy because Tim had one. When I told Robert what it was, he says, I don't like him, so I won't use it, Robert, don't worry. A couple things. One is in terms of the CCS plant, just a little plug for SaskPower, it is really significant, and it really is.
Globally significant.
That's what I was going to say. In the global context, I said to Robert last year, the weight of the coal industry in the globally is on your shoulders. I'm not sure you really liked that when I said that, but it is significant, and all the credit to the province of Saskatchewan, SaskPower, for going forward to it. Very impressive. And to Elyse, I've been through the Markham Center, and it's extremely impressive, and I recommend everyone go through there to get a concept of what the future could look like.
Sorry, your question.
Actually, it's more, I have an answer.
Oh, okay. Even better.
Yeah, because the question, one of the barriers, and we've been starting to talk around it, is actually regulatory process. And that we have 13 regulators, 13 processes, and each one has a different view of what's an acceptable risk and not acceptable. You cannot, as the panel's already said, you cannot do innovation without things failing. And you need a lot. And actually, and Tim, are you ducking there? Tim and I, through the CGA and CEA, we've actually had a paper produced for us at the end of last year that we'll be releasing shortly that actually looked at regulatory process in different parts of the world that actually do a better job of funding innovation.
Funding innovation.
Funding innovation, customer funding, and how it gets, because the challenge for a lot of companies is, especially if you're fully regulated, if you take a risk and it pays off, the benefit tends to be clawed back to the consumer. If it fails, you eat it. So where's the incentive to be innovative?
Right.
And so, yes, things are happening in parts of Ontario. Things are happening in different provinces. A lot more could happen if we had more open process in terms of funding innovation through the regulatory process. And I think in the long term, we'll also have to start looking at how we actually innovate the regulatory process itself to accommodate more as we get more distributed generation, variable energy resources. It's a whole thrust that way as well. Anyways, we will be releasing the paper at some point, Tim, and it's significant for all the provinces to pay attention to it.
So getting the regulator to support more innovation, and then secondly, getting the regulator to be innovative.
Yeah, and it's not that they don't want to be, it's just that they need policy and permission to be.
Okay. Okay. Do any of you want to comment on that? Can we have the mic passed to the next question? We've got a question over here.
I'll just comment on that for an interesting point in that in Saskatchewan, we don't have a regulator. It's really nice. Yeah, it's really nice.
There's a question over here.
However, what we do is what we've set up is a situation in what I call a public enterprise. We've set the culture up within SaskPower to be an enterprise culture. In other words, we only get so much money a year, and then that you have to deal with that money like any sort of private public company has to deal with. And that anything we look at has to have a model, a business model to it. It has to have a business, even if it's an innovation file or something, it has to have a business model attached to it. And I think that's actually helped us focus and identify opportunities for cabinet to look at. Because, then what happens is once our minister supports it, it goes direct to cabinet and it gets a decision pretty darn quick. And all you want is a decision, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. You just want a decision so you can move on to the next opportunity, and we're able to do that.
Yeah. Sorry, Marin, we'll come to you in a second. Eddie?
Eddie Isaacs with Alberta Innovates Energy Environment Solutions. I really enjoyed the panel discussion, and especially the thought about sustainable funding going forward. So Elyse, thank you for that. I was wondering about the diversification of the energy economy, and if you could speak to how that's going to take shape as we move into the future.
Can you say more about what you mean by the diversification?
Yeah, just moving from the current system that we have in place.
You're talking about electricity?
Electricity, or even biofuels, or
Production, all of it.
sections of the economy that we're talking about, clean tech and so on. And how do we actually start to make sure that we quantify how that diversification is taking place, the kind of jobs that are being created and so on.
Well, can I ask you to maybe articulate, I know you know the answer to this, but can you articulate why we should diversify?
We're looking for new jobs. We're looking for additional jobs from different sectors of the energy economy. And so many provinces are looking at how do you actually diversify from the current energy economy that we have to a greater value-added economy, whether it's in petrochemicals or other areas of clean tech.
Right, so this idea that over time we're going to broaden where our energy economy is located.
It's a question of getting greater value for the resources we have, as an example.
Yeah, and dependent on our own geographies and geologies.
Correct.
Yeah, great. Elyse?
I'll be glad to take a start. I mean, even as our company, we're agnostic on power generation because we're just in it all. And I think part of it is in the world, because of the different economics that you have in so many places, the world needs it all. And we think that as over time, when you're talking, Eddie, as you said, the real long run, rather than bet on any one player, we're actually saying we're trying to, as even sort of within our own world of our company, how do we make sure we're able to play? So how do we make sure that both right now we're in that power generation suite across all forms, so we're agnostic, and then from a research standpoint, how are we making sure that we have the underpinnings to play in what we don't know is going to happen yet? So how do we make sure that we have the flexibility and the pieces to respond to the markets and to the new technologies we haven't thought about? How many of us were talking about the new gas economy 5 years ago, other than Tim? So, but I mean, Canada, when you think of our country, we have between the strong forestry, the strong biomass, the incredible energy market with oil and gas, the strength of our electricity and our utility system, we have the capacity as a country to probably be one of the most diversified, prepared, technology-savvy energy countries in the world.
Right.
And I think when the provinces are getting together, I would be thinking a lot about that and not be afraid of exploiting that, but actually thinking about how do we make this, a huge, huge competitive advantage, national competitive advantage. And every province can play. Mm-hmm. Every province can play in the energy story. And there are not too many countries in the world, and we do business in 160 of them, that have the breadth of capacity in the energy story that this country has. And instead, I think we let some of the social conversation distract us from a capacity to be the green, clean leader of energy in the world and all the underpinning technology.
Sounds like an own the podium strategy, don't you think? I've got a question here from Marin Smith, and then I'll come to you, Vicki. Yep. Can we have a microphone here?
I'll just comment further on the diversity. There's no question that utilities should have a diverse power mix, and also, again, a diversity of clean versus base load and not so clean, let's put it that way, because until you get something further along. Two examples I give, first and foremost, is Germany, where they went whole into wind power But their utility bills are 3 to 4 times higher than a normal Canadian utility bill. And also, coming from a telecommunications, somebody would have a $300 or $400 telecommunications bill into their house a month, and yet when HDTV came out for $80 a month, they'd add it on in a heartbeat. Yet a $120 average bill, and if you increase their power bill by 1%, all hell breaks loose, right? So that's the real fact you're dealing with all across the country. There's no question about it. So the idea of doing that and the mix is very important, to get a diverse mix, for sure.
Marin.
So again, a really great panel. And one theme that I'm hearing is really these great stories of pilot projects and opportunities and things happening that I don't think the global marketplace knows that we have that potential that you're talking about. I don't think Canadians actually know that story either. And so one of my questions really is, it looks to me like the Canadian energy strategy, as Premier Wynne has said, we need it to be more than the existing, but where we could go. And is it a place where we could put stretch goals, like Canada will have a smart grid system across the nation by X year, or Canada will have, 99% clean electricity, whether it's the CCS in Saskatchewan or shifting off to, virtually 100% clean electricity by X year. So we don't just say where we are, but we have those stretch goals in place so Canadians could see what we could be,
right,
and the global marketplace could see that as well. So I'm just wondering what you think of that idea. One thing just to say, our organization went across the country in 2011 and 2012 and did workshops with some people here in this room and others from the business sector and stakeholder groups. We put together a vision and a clean energy accord that was signed on by 700 organizations and businesses.
Marin, not a commercial, please.
No, I'm just getting to where this question comes from. One of the things that came up consistently, even in Alberta, was whether we should also strive to be like that practical and successful nation of Norway, where they've actually put a royalty on their oil and gas wealth and are using that to help them transition to that future. And so we did polling on that the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Canadians strongly support that, and I'm wondering what you all think of that idea as well.
Well, in some ways, Alberta's doing that already
Right.
in their own jurisdiction, so they've taken a cut at that. But I'll let you guys respond, and then we'll take a question from Vicki, and then I can take one more question if there is one. Or so, if somebody, a microphone to Vicki, and then one to Greg, and we'll wrap it up. But please, if you want to comment.
I think the question of setting goals, I mean, of course, yes, I think we should be setting goals. I think in many ways, many areas we are setting those goals. And having a sense of what a carbon price might look like in this country is very important, as we've heard from the Canadian Council of Chief Executives. So, speaking from an investor standpoint and knowing what large corporations are looking for, you need to have that visibility into what the future expectations are for you to make those large investments. So, absolutely, as best as we can.
So goals help facilitate investment, okay?
I would just say yes, and not only should we have goals, but the goals shouldn't be, are we better than the province next door or the guy down the street? They have to be, and I think your point about global, because that's how I think we will become, by having aspirational goals that will set us apart on a global stage, I think is what's really important, and it also drives the best of innovation. Just being better than the guy next door for us doesn't do it. It's a very connected global economy, and I think from a technology standpoint, our achievements have to be of a global stature. And I think many of them are, and when they are, we need to also tell that story globally.
Right, because you reminded us about supply chains earlier. Robert, do you want to comment?
Well, the only comment I'll have is that I do not personally nor company-wise do we agree with the carbon tax. I think it's a false economy. I think to force that, I believe, will force money to be invested in projects that aren't worthy just for the fact you got to spend it. Australia had a great carbon tax. They built their fund up to, I think, $1.7 billion. And it wasn't being used, so therefore the government's scooping some of it back again. So I think regulation's the way to go. So.
And so Here we have a picture of the debate within the Federation on carbon pricing.
It's a good debate.
Yes, and it's a good debate. Vicky, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, thanks, Velma. Vicky Sharp, SDTC. You mentioned models, and I wanted to bring that up a little bit more fully as a panel observation around the success of models. I mean, we're certainly working in Alberta on what's called the Low Carbon Innovation Alliance, and it contains CCMC, Carbon Management Canada, Eddie at Alberta Innovates, our colleagues at NRCan. And what we're saying is that everything is so fragmented, it's not necessarily a barrier that everyone wishes to create, it's just there. And it's about all the pieces of players in that innovation spectrum that need to come together. Likewise, here in Ontario, SDTC couldn't function without all the work on the ground with Mars and the Ministries of Economy and Energy and Economic Development, etc. Is there a way that perhaps the organization that's putting this together, we could actually share best practices as part of this bigger initiative and then agree that there will be almost a domino effect? If something looks really great, can we all coalesce around it and support it? Because there isn't enough risk capital at the early stage yet. There is an issue with absorbing risk in this country. So I don't know if that might be of value.
Great, thanks. So systems for sharing best practices. Are you aware of some now? Do you have a model for what we might do?
I think the new Advanced Energy Center can maybe be a catalyst for helping share those best practices. And the more collaboration we can get, the better, because I also envision a time where a corporation like GE can come to the country and say, I need to see the best of the best startups in the smart grid space. And you've got the various organizations across the country who've aggregated the best of the best and can then show those to whatever corporation might be coming to ask that question, because that's what's going to attract foreign investment on the innovation front to the country.
Right.
And to follow up on that, I mean, in fact, we actually did that with Mars. And, we're Mars, and we brought in our VC firms, and we brought in our product people a couple of years ago under the Ontario MOU. And we had a session here, and we did it in healthcare, not in smart grid. But, we brought in sort of all the players. And I think as we have the strength of more and more innovation centers, like whether it's Communitech, the one up in Northern Ontario that I'm forgetting for the moment, Mars here, Alberta Innovates and the work we're doing there. We just did something on licensing there. Working with EDC, we brought in suppliers at our Bromont facility to share. So I think I think you're totally right. Having groups on the ground who can help pull together the startups that we don't have necessarily visibility to, or people with the technologies, becomes really important, and them linking to multinationals, at least that's the model I know. Whether it's supply chain or new customers or new technology, you can create all sorts of linkages. But if we don't know who to go to, and they don't know the multinationals, if we can't get the two groups together, nothing happens. And so the strength of the Mars, the STDCs, becomes really incredible infrastructure for any of those models.
Right, and kind of an innovation infrastructure.
Right.
Robert,
The only quick comment is I agree with 100%. I would have certainly private enterprise involved in discussions, government, but also crown corporations, because crown corporations are the ones that sort of breach the two. They're thinking as businesses, but they are government. So that helps to have the three bodies there.
Three bodies. Okay, that's a great suggestion. Greg, if you would quickly, you get the last
Greg
question.
Kiesling, Bullfrog Power. Very quick question, and we all love what SaskPower is doing with CCS. I think it's fantastic, and they're doing it without a price on carbon, which is even more amazing. My question is really about that topic, and getting a quick view from each of the panelists. When we're thinking about what policy really enables Canadian energy innovation going forward, what's your view on, does a revenue neutral, distributionally neutral price on carbon pollution help or hurt Canadian innovation in energy on the long term? Thanks.
Greg, we told you not to ask any hard questions.
So we'll just let you go down the chain. I think we know directionally where these answers will go, but please go ahead.
Personally, would I rather be taxed on my income or taxed on my pollution? I mean, I want to see a price on carbon. And from an investor standpoint, I think once you have it, we've got a ton of brilliant ideas out there that'll move in and solve that problem once you kind of unleash the creativity of the market.
Elyse?
Yeah, as a supplier and an innovator, when you have the economics work, it works when you have a price on carbon.
Robert?
False economy. I know. I know. I mean, put in a target, put in a regulation, put in something there, and then pay the people who are smart enough to make sure you get there on a reasonable, affordable way, rather than have the money go off somewhere else.
Well, so just to, first we'll thank our panelists in just a moment, but I mean, one of the things that's encouraging to me about the fact that we're having this conversation now is I think for a long time in this country we were waiting until we had regulations or we had a price on carbon before we felt that we were going to have a robust clean technology or energy innovation sector. I think the last 5 years have proven that we don't need regulation, we don't need a carbon tax to do that. And it's not just in this country, I think it's happening globally. We're starting to see the conversation change about those drivers. And I think the question over carbon pricing is really a question over what is the best facilitative policy framework to allow things to accelerate. There are differences of views about that, but I think we can agree that it's necessary to start accelerating the pathway so that we can be getting at more of this energy innovation. So with that, I'd ask you to join with me in thanking the panel.